Welcome everyone to the session today, and I just want to make some house announcements before we begin the session. So I just want to highlight that this session is being recorded and also live streamed on YouTube. And I request all the participants to keep their videos on off and the mics on mute so as to avoid any disturbance. And we will take up questions after the panel discussion during question and answer session. And please feel free to post them in the chat box, and we will moderate them accordingly after the panel discussion. Thank you, and over to Alka now for the opening remarks.
Thanks, Shubhagi. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Policy Brief webinar series of CUTS International. Today's webinar is co-hosted by Cybersathi and CUTS, as in on a very important topic, women in technology, bridging gender equality in the digital ecosystem. I would firstly want to share that we have just received a message from Madam Rekha Sharma's Honorable Chairperson, National Commission for Women Office, that Madam has some urgent piece of work which has just come up and she won't be able to join us today. Yes, the recommendations and key points that will emerge from the webinar will be shared with her office and with Madam for further actions. I apologize on that, and very pleased to welcome a very distinguished panel today that we have with us for their insights. Briefly about today's session, we know that SDG Goal 5B well targets enhancing role of ICT to promote empowerment of all women and girls. And we do realize that in India, in the last couple of months, there has been rapid digitalization of education and health sectors. And that ways, India would have to take a lot of special efforts to bridge the gender digital divide. Because we see that in the last couple of months, the gap in access to even education has widened as far as girls having access to education is concerned. And today is such an important day to talk about it because it's National Education Day, and we would like our panelists to shed some light on that. Before we begin with the panel, I would request my colleague Shubhangi Heda to take us through a brief presentation that brings highlights of the policy brief, and then we take a panel discussion. Thanks. Shubhangi?
Thank you, Alka. I would request Saptish to please share the slides. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to highlight that in the past few months, CUTS International has taken the initiative to publish a series of policy briefs on technology and society interaction, which ranges in the fields of EdTech, health tech, and fintech, and now women in tech. And this webinar is one such effort to actually further the discourse on women in tech and explore the technology and society interactions in this space to strive for a more inclusive and a fair digital space. And for that, and after that, so just to give some context, as we may know that the technology is playing a critical role in our lives, and it has penetrated in every walk of our life, and there is a rapid digitization that is happening. And it specifically during the COVID times, it has become the means to ensure the delivery of essential services such as education and healthcare, and as Alka mentioned. So while this space and the digital space is rapidly expanding, we must focus on the goals of Sustainable Development 5, which is to bring in gender equality, and specifically SDG 5B, to enhance the use of information and communications technology for women empowerment. But as we see that technology has come about as a medium to deliver these services, the access to these services is much more limited and the challenges still persist. And I think that one of the challenges is due to the digital gender divide, and it has been stated by the report of Internet Telecommunications Union in 2019 that while the overall usage of internet has gone up in recent years, the internet usage by women globally is still at 48% compared to 58% amongst men. Next slide, please. So in our policy brief, we have identified kind of three key assessment or three key challenges which women are facing while they're interacting with technology, and which relates to digital gender divide, privacy perception and cybersecurity concerns, and women's economic participation and future of work. I think one of the key underlying problem or challenge is the digital gender divide, which persists. And in fact, specifically in India, a report has stated that the women's usage of internet or internet-enabled devices is just half compared to their male counterparts. And this gap is being further widened, specifically in rural areas. And while the causes for this divide pertains to infrastructural constraints, financial constraints, and societal constraints, it is actually shocking to see that the inacceptance of the society for women to actually use this technology pertains to their presumption that it might affect their moral standings or may distract them from household work. And this kind of notion specifically persists in rural areas, which kind of limits women's access to technology. Now, while this digital gender divide actually persists in all the fields, but it is specifically transcended into digital economy. Digital economy is supposed, or it's presumed, to give more employment opportunities and create a flexible work environment for women. But actually, due to the lack of ICT skills and digital literacy, women are not able to tap into those opportunities. And we have also observed that the traditional challenges that exist in the workspaces have also transcended into the platform economy, just such as the gender pay gap or structural inequalities and the gender difference in power relations. And one of the last concerns and one of the key assessments is also that while the digital gender divide persists, even within the existing online spaces, there has been a rise in cybercrimes in the past few years. And in fact, during the COVID times, as online activities actually increased, we have observed that the cybercrimes cases reported by women have actually gone up. And I think, like, while we have a myriad of laws in India and I think elsewhere around the world to address these concerns, specifically in India, there are laws around cyber stalking, cyberbullying, and transmission of indecent and obscene material, which are covered within the Information Technology Act or Indian Penal Code or Indecent Representation of Women's Act. But while these laws do recognize cybercrimes, the way in which they address it falls shorthand. And this specifically pertains to nuances such as how we assess how consent is given online and how we assess who to assign the burden of proof to. And this leads to sort of less bargaining power in the hands of women. Moreover, many of the cybercrimes just go unreported because of women's lack of knowledge or awareness to identify those cybercrimes, and then regarding the lack of knowledge regarding the procedure to in fact lodge a complaint. And I think these ambiguities or lack of clarity also stems from lack of understanding the differing perception of women regarding their privacy in online spaces. And in fact, a privacy perception survey, which was undertaken by CUTS International, reflected that women are more cautious while sharing some of their personal information, such as personal photos or email IDs. And while reputation is their primary concern while sharing it, thus it kind of becomes necessary that when we are assessing women's privacy or cybersecurity online, we bring in the contextual elements in which the information is being shared and what information is shared to protect the informational autonomy of women. All these challenges are interlinked. All these challenges are interlinked to each other, and we need to address them very holistically, because while one challenge cannot be addressed without addressing the two other challenges. Next slide, please. In our policy brief, we have also identified some of the way forward to address these challenges, but I want to highlight that for addressing these challenges and paving a way forward, all the stakeholders need to come together, which includes the civil society, the government institutions, industry representatives, entrepreneurs, and regulators. And I'm sure that our panel discussion will further shed light on this way forward and presented in a more concrete manner. So one of the way forward is undertaking targeted digital skilling and digital literacy campaigns. So while it is important to actually target these campaigns within the rural areas and to highlight the accessibility of technology for women, it is also important to improve the image of technology as not just a source of entertainment, but also as a source of beneficial access to services such as education, healthcare, and actual economic upliftment. Strengthening infrastructures and procedures to address cybercrimes against women. It is important to revisit how we interpret provisions within the cybercrime laws or penal codes, and we can sort of contextualize these provisions to better capacitate these procedures to address complaints of women. Capacity building initiatives for women to identify cybercrimes and equipping them with the knowledge to register complaints. It's also very much important to train women to identify the cybercrimes and for them to take actions, and for actually collaborating with private intermediaries to address these challenges and make the online spaces much more safer for women. Last but not the least, it is very much important to incentivize women to uptake the fields of science, technology, mathematics, and engineering to increase their role not just as consumers of technology, but also as regulators and users and innovators and engineers, so that we can actually say that digital spaces are more inclusive and are representative of all the sectors of the community. Thank you very much for the presentation. And I hope that our panel discussion will shed light on some of these points and present it in a more concrete way. Now over to Alka. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Shubhangi, for this very brief and precise presentation by you. Now I'm requesting Ms. Napi Nai, Advocate Supreme Court and founder Cyber Saathi, to please come in and take us to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alka. Thank you so much, Alka. It's a pleasure to be here and to be joined by such eminent and erudite persons in the panel. Just to set the theme for today's session, we are talking here about women and technology and juxtaposing it in the perspective of gender equality. When we speak about equality, as Shubhangi has already pointed out very succinctly, it talks about equal treatment, not just in terms of access or opportunities, it's also of access, opportunity, and empowerment on multiple scales. It could be from food, health, education, employment, pay, or to, as she rightly said, economic diversity with respect to technology. In today's discussions, we will be taking forward the conversation not just in terms of equal access to technology and its empowerment for women, but also of equal participation of women in this field. When we talk about equality, it is important to take a reality check. And look at some of the statistics that come up. When we talk about women in education, a UNICEF report of 2019 placed 1 in 4 girls are neither employed nor educated, as opposed to 1 in 10 boys. And in India, the equality aspect is worse. We Forum's report speaks about how Indian girls belonging to families in the top 20% get 9 years of education. We are talking about 9 years as opposed to even the minimum requirement today under Indian laws also, as opposed to the lower end of 20% who get none at all. The report also goes on to talk about all the practical difficulties with respect to even lack of toilets playing a role in the education of girls because of menstrual hygiene management facilities lacking in schools for nearly 23 million girls to drop out. When we talk about women and pay gaps, an Oxfam study of 2019 puts the gender pay gap in India at 34%. With women, of course, getting 34% less than their male counterparts. I would say 34% is still an optimistic claim, because reality could be still much farther away than that. India's GDP, India is talking about its growth quotient, and its GDP today stands around 6% increase. But the participation of women in the female labor force, or the labor force rather, has actually fallen drastically. Even during COVID times, whilst women were seen in the forefront in terms of support systems as nurses and educators, etc., in a lot of the lead roles, women were not as visible. So when we talk about equality and equal access to technology, we need a situation which is going to enable women to be part of the workforce that is contributing to technology, its development, its evolution, and its adaptation. So as a first level of input, I would request Mia to come in to speak on the policy aspects on how governance can help women to participate more as part of the workforce. Over to you, Mia.
Thank you, Napinai, and let me first start, as it is customary, to thank very much for the invitation to CUTS. CUTS has been a collaborator of the network, Asia Pacific Research and Training Network on Trade, that we coordinate for many years, and we go together in addressing all the important and relevant areas of economic development and sustainable development in Asia and the Pacific, and I'm very thankful for that collaboration. And of course, I would like to congratulate Subhanjay for the presentation of the policy brief. The policy brief is, I think, is focused on India, but it could be very well actually used to represent the issues for many countries in the region, because the issues that have been very well identified there, and some of the recommendations that are put forward can easily be just used for many countries in the region, according to my understanding. And thank you, Napinai, for starting with that question about what policies should be doing. But let me try to also just slightly rephrase that and tip it onto another angle and say, we have diagnosis as is shown in the policy brief, right? You have, and we clearly understand what seems to be the problems. We also have many recommendations. And the question then is, why do we still have no solution? Why we have some palliative treatments, but we don't have cure for this long-term problems with gender inequality and the lack of economic empowerment of women. And I apologize for maybe my radical view on this, but I would put forward my my view is that the measures that needs to be actually put forward, that we know what they are, that need to be put in place, they need to be funded, they need to be implemented, and they need to be occasionally adjusted and corrected by policymakers and technocrats and bureaucrats, are not there because all of these categories are still in the hands of men. And they basically do not understand what seems to be the issue and why these issues have to be corrected, and why it's actually in their best long-term interest to correct the problem. And let me give you, you gave some very useful statistics, but let me give you a little bit more of statistics that will go to the answer of why the policies that are there, we know what they are, but they are not put in place and implemented and enforced. According to the UN Women just recently issued, we have only 21 heads of states out of 193 countries. We have still only 1/4 of parliamentary seats occupied by women. That raises a little bit to 36% for the local authorities, but for the national one, it is only 1/4, right? When you look at globally across all the ministerial positions, only 21% of these ministerial positions are held by women. And so then when you look at the current situation with the COVID, right, when we were looking at responses to the COVID issues, right, there is a huge disparity that has been discovered, that 70% of health sector workers are actually women, yet only 25% of health ministers are women, right? And so, and then out of the 70% women that are working in health sectors, less than 1/4 are actually holding any important decision-making role. I think 72% of executives holding global health companies are men. And so that I can already see how that will actually sip into the policies and decisions made into vaccine production and distribution and priorities, etc., and financing, because it is simply, this is this imbalance in decision making and in influencing of the policies. And you know, often the language is wrong, and the media is, I think, communication is wrong, because we tend to talk about what can we do for these women to do better. No, women actually need to do something for themselves, right? And so the policies that we have, of course, they come into the very known and understandable baskets of policies. You need to start with education, you need to start with enabling policies, regulation, etc., and you need to start, you know, you need to follow it up or accompany it with funding, right? We all know that. The question is, why is this not done, right? And my submission to you is that that it's not done because of the cultural barriers and many other barriers that exist in societies. I think we have opened today's discussion saying that you know, so many women do not have access to internet. How many people actually know that it was a woman who is credited to a great degree with actually existence of internet, right? And it was Radia Perlman who actually created the spanning tree protocol that enabled the interconnectivity, right? And obviously internet is not one technology, is not one person, and it's not one moment in time. But without that, it would have been much different a time track in that. And how many, you know, why don't we in education actually teach everyone, not only girls, of the significance of women's contribution to science, you know, to computer coding, to programming, to engineering, to art and everything else, so that we actually raise their confidence and dispel this myth that we need to help poor women to do something because they're not capable of standing on their own feet and thinking with their own head, as it is visible from, you know, preventing girls to use internet because it will distract them or impact their morality, etc. So we are working with governments regularly, day in and day out, in trying to really enforce two things. You know, what are the proper enabling policies that need to be put in place, and actually how to change the structure of policy making human capital, so that women actually take hold of being influencers into policies and policy making. Let me stop here, and I'm sure that we will expand this discussion as we go. Thank you.
Yeah, I request that my mic not be muted because it's very difficult to coordinate otherwise. Thank you so much for those very valuable inputs, Mia. You know, we're talking about the very basic or the first level of requirement when it comes to women and technology, which is of the right of access for education. There is, as was pointed out in the opening comments itself, there is a perception that it is all about entertainment when we talk about access, but it's not really so. Predominantly, access to technology is more about empowering from education, which was actually recognized by Kerala High Court decision, which upheld the right of girl students for equal access to the internet, as should boys be made available for. Moving forward from education to job opportunities. Rima, you're working from a grassroots level. You understand the permeation of technology in terms of its utilization and the empowerment that it places in the hands of the users. So your opening comments on that.
Thank you so much. And I think what Mia was saying and what was also shown in the presentation, I think what the kind of enabling policies we need is to enable and equip the women at the grassroots level, especially in the informal sector, so that they are able to use the technology, the digital technology, to their best possible means. I don't think they need a kind of a sympathetic approach. And let me give you an example. When I was working on the Global Commission on Future of Work, I was aghast to see that women were slipping out from the workforce. You know, their wages were, there was a huge disparity in the wages. And then we had not even anticipated that something like the pandemic would come in such a short time after the Commission's report was out. And the pandemic has put everything on a fast track mode, especially when we talk about the digital technology, whether you want it or not. Today we are all on a Zoom. I mean, whether you want to use that technology or not. So I think, let me give you some examples of, you know, when women, for them, innovation is a survival or a coping strategy. It's not a luxury. And therefore, the women in the informal sector have to start innovating. And I will give you example of a waste collector. You know, Savita is a waste collector, and when I was talking to her 15 days in lockdown, and she was telling me that, you know, well, you know, sister, in this lockdown, everybody is sitting in the home, but I have to get out of my home. Otherwise, how will I survive? And, you know, I keep watching on the media that, you know, rummaging in the waste is going to be very hazardous for us waste collectors, because, you know, if, the waste may be contaminated as well. And how did she then? So I said, how do you survive then? And she said, I started posting on WhatsApp and on I have my own Facebook page now. And she said, I started posting that here's a waste collector looking for work. And she was approached by the government civil hospital that would she be willing to come and work in the COVID ward of the hospital to repair the toilets and the drainage lines. She was not trained as a plumber. She was not trained on using social media, but it was, you know, the circumstances that pushed her to start using social media. And today, Savita, with her team of 22 waste collectors, is managing the toilets and the drainage system of the civil hospital. So I think, there was no policy, there was no skilling, there was nothing. But, it was, if you put the technology into the hands of the women, they know how to best use it to their advantage. Also, let me give you example of, some of the master trainers in the villages. The lockdown was there, the children were all at home. In the villages, we all know that these are small little huts in which they live. How do you now communicate with each other? Normally, it's a face-to-face communication, face-to-face trainings that happen. And these master trainers, they called up the training center and they said, why can't we convert the modules into e-modules? So the trainers sitting in the training center started preparing the PowerPoint presentations, and the women who were master trainers in the villages started giving their voice. So that's how it became a participatory process, and a sense of ownership came. So everybody in the village now started recognizing that, oh, this is Rani's voice, and this is, Savita's voice, and these are our sisters. And therefore the messaging became much more powerful. The ownership was there. So the COVID awareness, amongst everything was much, much more faster. I will give third example and then stop here. We had the vegetable growers, these small farmers who grow vegetables, and this was the peak season when the pandemic first hit our country in March and April. And the vegetables there was no transportation, the markets were all closed down. How do you now ensure that my livelihood is sustained? And on the other side, we had the vegetable vendors as our members, who also could not earn any single rupee because the lockdown was there. So here there was this, WhatsApp connection that started happening. The vegetable growers started connecting the vendors, and the vendors then coordinated with the municipal authorities, and they got the e-rickshaws. So all the containment zones where the basic supplies had to be provided, these vendors started using the e-rickshaws and going to the containment zones and supplying. And where would the supplies come from? These small farmers who were growing vegetables and fruits and dairy products. So, and today now we have a full-fledged enterprise, which is connecting some 400 vegetable growers and some 1,500 vegetable vendors. And they ply some 30 e-rickshaws, and they have now a little portal of their own. So the customers give online orders. So the grower knows that, okay, tomorrow I need to send 500 kgs of okra or 200 kgs of eggplant, and that touches the city center at 6 a.m. in the morning, so that all the grading, sorting, packaging is done, and the delivery is over by noon. So this is how I think, if you put technology into the hands of the informal sector women workers, because for them survival is a day-to-day issue. And they cannot wait for skilling, they cannot wait for policies. I think the policymakers ought to learn from these people that, what kind of policies now need to be in place, so that you equip not just a few hundred or thousand, but millions of informal sector workers in countries like ours. I'll just stop here.
Thank you. That was really encouraging and amazing, Reema. So, I was looking at the Supreme Court's decision in Babita Punya's case, and when they are striking down typical stereotypes, and they talk about all the issues that, you would have, it's you realize that this is a 2020 judgment, and you realize not much has changed in terms of patriarchal assumptions, right? So there are issues such as like how women have to deal with pregnancy, therefore they cannot. And this was a case which dealt with permanent commissions for women in the Indian Army. And the Supreme Court struck down the statements such as women need to deal with pregnancy, they have physiological differences which, you know, automatically result in limitation. They are not comfortable in an all-male environment. So what exactly is an all-male environment, and why has it resulted in an all-male environment was lost in the process of making these submissions. And it was a very heartening outcome that the Supreme Court gave in Babita Punya's case. And to a large extent, this decision takes forward some of the narratives that the Supreme Court highlighted in its privacy judgment also on in Puttaswamy's case in 2017. Anya, when we talk about the intersection of privacy and you know, empowerment, and we talk about privacy and women, there is an automatic assumption that protectionism is the better way forward, and the patriarchal mechanism of using protectionism to keep you protected by restricting your rights in terms of access to online spaces is one part of it. And the other part, of course, is what you've already been working on in terms of what is the intersection in terms of personal data protection, privacy, and women empowerment. So it's over to you to share your preliminary thoughts on this, on how can we make the digital space more equal.
Thank you, Nabina, and thank you also to CUTS International for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here, as always, with like-minded people thinking about similar things. I think I mean, in general, the question about protectionism comes up in the context of the kind of abuse that we see happening on the internet as well, right? So we've heard a lot of encouraging stories today already, but that's clearly not the only thing that's going on. I think, though, where we have a real challenge moving forward is that at the moment, when we think about the solutions, so much of what is proposed still really focuses on only giving the woman who's being attacked tools to actually fight back. So we look at learning to file police complaints. We look at action to be taken by platforms, etc. All of that is really important and valuable, of course, but it's also really limited, and for two reasons. First of all, it really puts the burden for safety on the women being targeted. And I actually think that even recommendations like Shubhangi put up around digital skilling, around digital literacy, again, these are important. But if we're going to look there for the answers, then basically what we are saying is women are responsible for keeping themselves safe online, which actually leads both to a protectionist approach, because how are you supposed to do that if there is no facilitation of an environment that makes it possible for you to do that effectively? But also then really makes you responsible, right? And what we see with protectionist approaches is that women often withdraw because privacy becomes not a right anymore, but a burden, a responsibility. And when you fail, you will be to blame as well, right? So these are basically two things, two sides of the same coin: privacy as a duty rather than a right, and this protectionist approach. What also happens is, when we only focus on what individuals can do, we don't really look at what makes abuse, what makes violence in the online space so rampant in the first place. Why do we have to worry about it to this extent? And so to create safe spaces, I think in a way that's very similar to what we have done in the offline space, we really need to also start thinking about the structural factors that shape our online environments and that actually shape how vulnerable we are or aren't, even if this will always be different for different people, right? So in the offline atmosphere, we've looked, for example, at street lighting, public toilets. Those kind of interventions we know make a fundamental difference to how safe or not offline public spaces can be. And so what is important is to start thinking more about what would that mean if you translate it into the online. And I'll give you one example. At the moment, one of the measures that we are advocating for at the Internet Democracy Project is that we really need to reconsider how we look at data. The dominant discourse of data is that data is this thing that is out there, ready to be mined, somehow separate from us, even if we are the ones who have provided it, right? But that's very often not how women actually experience data. And some of the statistics that Shubhangi shared also spoke to that. For example, if you speak to women who have been the victims of non-consensual sharing of sexual images, they generally will not talk about the harm that they experience as a data protection violation or even a privacy violation. They speak about it in terms of sexual assault. Recognizing that our bodies and our data are closely entangled actually makes it possible to talk about that harm. Because we don't put bodies into this debate, we can't talk about this harm. At the moment, there is no country that I am aware of that allows you to look at non-consensual sharing of sexual images as having a harm similar to sexual assault, right? It is dealt with under privacy or data protection laws. Now, the entanglement of bodies and data has consequences for the harms, and so how we would need to frame laws also, right? Because then if we start to think that data violations can actually lead to violations of bodily integrity, there certainly need to be laws that have much higher standards of protection than we have at the moment, and that use that language of bodily integrity as well. But what it also means is, at another level, that we also need to start thinking, for example, about what impact would thinking about data from this perspective have on how we assess the business models of many of the platforms on which we are sharing our data. And so we need to start looking at the infrastructure layer and the policy models that enable them as well. Because some of those are also untenable once you recognize that bodies and data are closely interconnected. For example, at the moment, third-party data sharing is crucial to how most businesses make profit in the online age. Because that's so crucial to their profit model, it's also crucial to how these platforms are designed. They are designed to encourage us to give as much data away as possible and to have as little control over it as a user as possible. Now, this is then really interesting, right? Because we say to protect yourself against online violence, you have to be very careful about what you share online. And at the same time, at the level of the infrastructure, we create an environment in which you are forced to give out your data if you actually want to be part of modern society. And it's not only businesses that are doing that, right? It is the government as well. So at the infrastructural level, we are creating an environment that is fundamentally much more unsafe for women. And so this is just one example to really illustrate how, if we want to think about online safe spaces like we have about, for example, streets, we really need to start thinking about these deeper challenges as well, which will not be easy because obviously the example I just gave affects our imaginations of the digital economy, right? But it is naive to think that we can actually create a safe environment without going there. So these are really challenges that I think we need to get into as well. I'll leave it for there now, Navneet. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya. That gives a lot of cause for concern and also a lot to think about. So that brings us to the aspect about security and safety online. So, for any space to be, and your examples that you gave about street lights, enabling a person to access a particular place which they would otherwise avoid because it's too dark and unsafe, is a classic example for the online space also. When we talk about safety online, the first level is not just about the users keeping themselves safe, but the system providing the safety and the users using that safety mechanism to keep themselves safe. That's the way one would look at it. Vishaka, we are seeing an increasing normalization of misogyny online. We are seeing that, feminism is becoming a bad word, and anybody who talks about women and gender equality are deemed to be talking about something that's actually anti-equality, right? So there are a lot of narratives that are happening today online, and it's also, and when you look at the targets, look at the Amnesty International report of 2019, the toxic Twitter one, which talks about the kind of toxicity that women politicians face, right? Similarly, we have seen that when a journalist takes a specific stance online, there is a lot of toxicity depending on the gender. So these are all gendered crimes and not just crimes online. These are very specific in terms of the modern manner of its delivery, and there seems to be this kind of acceptance, one, that it's all just online, it doesn't matter, right? And two, as was pointed out earlier also, that it is harmless because it's online. And what Anya brought out about how do we handle even a data issue? Is it a sexual assault? Is it a violation? Is it a personal violation? Or is it just some kind of an ephemeral privacy issue which is to be dealt with by a personal data protection law, etc., right? So when we look at these kind of narratives that are evolving in terms of actually not ensuring security, but more in terms of showing how unsecure the spaces, online spaces are. Your thoughts on not just what are the trending problems, but also what we could look at as possible solutions.
Thank you, Napinai, and thank you very much to CUTS for inviting me to this. Totally stimulated by everything that has been said so far and very much in agreement. So I'm going to start by using a word that I believe is increasingly relevant today, which is the word phygital. It's a combination of the physical and the digital. And I believe that we lead phygital lives. I believe we've actually been leading phygital lives in India for the last 10 years, ever since the Android mobile came to India in 2009. But our minds haven't caught up, right, with the fact that we are leading phygital lives. COVID has sort of forced us to realize that, right? So what I wanted to say about this is that, going to the point you were talking about, Napinai, when we fundamentally accept that our lives are both physical and digital, right, phygital, then it becomes meaningless to think about one plane as more real and one plane as less real, regardless of our personal preferences. We can say they are different in their relationship to reality, right? But not necessarily that one is unreal or less real, etc. And I think that is actually the fundamental cognitive bias that we actually see today, right? Among policymakers, among really, even everybody, me included, all of us. There's just a way in which we assume that everything physical is more important than everything digital. There's a way in which we position them as separate, even though we are using them simultaneously, right? There's a way in which we differentiate them, and there's a way in which we keep them as silos, which is not actually the way we live anymore. And so I want to say that I think going forward, we really have to replace it. It's all about ands, right? It's physical and digital. It's, as Anya said, body and data, but fused. It's not about ors any longer. And I think that's the big flip we need to make in our sort of cognitive systems. So, bringing that more specifically to gender, safety, etc., I'm just going to sort of build it as a series of arguments. I think if we look at even rural or tribal communities, if we use that kind of and phygital kind of hybrid thinking, then we would say that the resources we need to live with any longer are not just Jal, Jangal, Zameen, which is water, forest, land. Even if you're a tribal person who's gone with these resources, you still now need this digital resource, the mobile, in order to continue living. So we have to flip that. I would say similarly, if we now think about gender, just like we've said, discrimination in a physical age began at, early on with girls receiving less nutrition, education, like books, opportunities to play, like everything that you need in order to realize your potential as a full human being. We would again have to add into that we now experience not just a digital gender gap or divide, but actual gender discrimination. Why do we take it less seriously? Like, we've always argued that, the fact that boys or sons get better food or better nutritional resources helps them get better opportunities in life. But frankly, it's the same with digital resources today. If you have access to a mobile phone, and you can use it relatively unfettered, unconditionally, without parental surveillance, monitoring, control, etc., there is no doubt, despite the dangers that mobile environments can bring, that your opportunities for going forward in life exponentially increase, right? So we have to think about sort of gender discrimination, not just vis-a-vis nutrition, education any longer, but also vis-a-vis the mobile phone itself. And similarly, when we talk about belonging and that sense of being comfortable or, citizenship, physical, digital, whatever, a contested term, but nevertheless useful in some ways to convey at least a sense of belonging, rights, and entitlement. There too, what I would say again is that, just like if I have a camera and I'm just allowed to play with it continuously, the truth is I'll just become comfortable with it and I'll take better photos, but I'll feel like I'm part of that. Even with girls and women, if we give them phones and they can play with it, that's what gives you a sense of belonging. That's what gives you a sense of comfort, of ease, all of which are sort of underliers, right? You don't suddenly just jump up and say, hey, you need to use these things to be comfortable, right? Like the fact that I'm sitting here happily is because I've done this like a million times, right? And I have the space and agency to do it. So moving from all this to sort of the safety, etc., I think the big point I really want to make is that safety online is again a hybrid. It's partly dealing with patriarchy and gender offline, and it's partly dealing with it online. And I'm just going to give you 3-4 examples. Let's, think about bank accounts. So interesting. When we do workshops with rural women, they'll say that, hey, and this is related to privacy, that, I woke up one morning and I went to the bank and there was hardly any money left. Now you would think that's because some strange person has come and robbed them, but not necessarily. It could just be because it's assumed in patriarchal societies, that women will, as a matter of right, that men will have access, right, to women's private information, including passwords. So there have been cases where, unfortunately, women have had to wake up to the fact that suddenly their savings have diminished, not because somebody from the dark net suddenly arrived in rural Uttar Pradesh, but because it's so sad that a family member, took advantage of that power, took their password and used that. So you see, what I'm trying to say is we can teach them how to build stronger passwords. But unless we can reconfigure that gender dynamic, how are we going to stop this situation, right? whether it's a social media account, a password, whether it's a, a trans couple or a queer couple saying teenage, like, hey, if you love me, you'll share your password with me. That is now the modern norm, right? Like in an earlier era, you might have said, hey, if you love me, you'll share your whatever with me. And I want to actually say, like, it's interesting because I think, one of the things with sort of sexuality, violence online is always the body and data thing. Now it's no longer just, if you love me, you'll share your body with me regardless of your consent. It's you'll share your picture of your body with me as well, right? The data. So I'm just trying to, rather than bring it to very prescriptive things, the bigger point I want to make, and then I'll end, we can get into details later, is that really if we want, women and girls to really occupy these spaces freely and fearlessly, which is our aim, not conditionally and, always having to justify, then we really have to think dually. Patriarchy plus gender, always, whether it's safety, violence, whatever. Yeah.
Lovely thoughts there, Vishakha. And what you closed out with in terms of one, the physicality lives and the way things are moving from physical to digital world, and it's actually the same in a way, right? So these are all issues that we should probably touch upon if time permitting in terms of the security angle also. So I have requested for all your mics to be unmuted, and it's been really it's been wonderful that there are a lot of interesting questions that are coming from the audience. So I'm going to park some of my questions and I'm going to move straight to the audience questions. And where possible, I'll try to pose it to one of you. Otherwise, please, whoever wishes to address any of these questions, please just put your hands up and take the question. I would assume that this first question would probably I would pose it to Mia and Reema, but I would leave it open for Anya and Vishakha to also address it. Kapil Gupta talks about the McKinsey Global Institute's report, which says that GDP of India can increase to 16% if Indian women are given a larger piece of the pie in becoming more part of the workforce. So he wants to know, how can policy and physical institutions and or industries address this aspect? So can it only be policies, or as Vishakha was pointing out, is it more in terms of a mental framework? Do we have to go grassroots and then move upwards, or can policy bring about the change to the grassroots level too? So over to you and all the panelists.
Shall I start? Okay. I think it is not one thing ever. There is no one thing solution here. You have to, because you can put as many policies, but if there are barriers in cultural and in our minds, you will not achieve anything, right? So, but the policies definitely need to be there. Regulation needs to be there. Otherwise, you cannot really formalize these and you cannot expand it. And I think financing is the key to, and empowering the women to stay in the labor market and in the producing sector, right? And we need to somehow switch our thinking from really linking the financing only through the established banking system, right, to the innovative financing, to using really digital technology and go into this fintech sphere where we can expand it in so many ways, right? But we also need to combine public and private sector in order to actually produce more of a sustainable and more widespread financing, right? I mean, even the policy briefs mentioned the women's bond, and we have very good experiences, including in my organization, on how to do it. Impact investment and really drilling or educating private sector how they can actually directly help by looking into impact investment is definitely one take. But also we directly engage in providing grants to the small and medium-sized enterprises. I will if host allow me, put some links in there to provide the cases that actually really show what Rima was saying and others in the panel of innovative strength and resilience in women when you give them access to digital technology and to other form of technology, because it's not only digital technology we are talking about here, right? So I think in short, Napinai, it's not one way that you can do it, but regulation is important. Education, I would, everyone is talking about, let's educate women to know how to use ICT and create business models. No, they need confidence building courses. They need to actually understand that they can do it on their own. They don't need father, mother, brother, whatever, in that, and that they can actually show that confidence when they present themselves at whichever level. And this needs to be taught, right? Because it doesn't come naturally to, particularly in some societies, for women to take that stand. So I would complement the education with those sorts of these sorts of courses. And we are responsible as women to bring at least one woman with us as we go through our career to leave behind, to carry the light with us, right? Back to you.
So, Rima, actually, this brings it back to what you had mentioned in your opening statement about how, policymakers can take lessons from the people who are working at grassroots level. And we are talking also about how policy can bring about a change in terms of uniformizing the kind of anecdotal experiences which you shared. So your thoughts in terms of the query post, as also how we can do this kind of a cross-sectional development of policy using, study of actual instances and also of grassroots work contributing to the formulation of policy.
Thank you so much. And I would structure my response into three different aspects. One is that definitely, as Mia was saying, that one needs to look at investment. And this is, how do women have access to finance when they want to access technology? So it's not just that, what kind of collateral is needed if I wanted to take a loan to buy a smart gadget? And unless and until I have a smart gadget, how am I going to, access and open a whole new world for me, or enter a different market, or access better healthcare, or access better education opportunities for my children? So, are there banks which are willing to give loans for this kind of, products? Are there products available? Whether you call Mudra Bank or SHGs or this or that, it's all buzz and talk. But when you actually go, I'm going to be very blunt today because it's very frustrating, So when you, it's on top, but when you actually go to get a loan, whether from an MFI or from a bank, that I want to buy a smartphone or I want to buy a tablet, do I have access? So that's the whole one aspect, and that's where the private sector needs to come in. How do you build partnerships? Partnerships in risk taking and partnerships in sharing the advantages as well. The second thing I want to say is about, we are talking about now digital education. The schools are all going online. Think of a family in an urban slum or in a rural village which has 3 or 4 school-going children. Do they have access to 3 or 4 smart gadgets? So who gets the opportunity to study and who doesn't get the opportunity? And very often it's the young boys who are sitting in front of those smart devices when the school's classes are going on, and the girls are helping the parents or whatever else they are able to do. What kind of policy does this call for? And this is what I was trying to say, that the policymakers need to listen to what's happening on the ground. Thousands of children are devoid access to education just because it is online education. They don't have access to 3 or 4 smart devices, and all the classes are going on at the same time. So that mother is struggling. She wants her daughter to attend the classes, but how is she going to do that? And so, those are the kinds of challenges which are there. The third, and I like what Anya said, digital or platform economies are becoming the new public space now. And, if that is the new public space, how do you prepare the young girls and the women to deal and, feel safe and secure on those platforms, on those digital platforms? And my last point, and that would be the end, is that, how do they have access to data? If it's my data, how do I have access to my data? Because you keep on signing all the terms and cookie policies and these terms in such tiny, tiny letters, all in English. Who's going to read all that? And by that way, you are taking away all my rights, and I'm giving you all my rights. And that's what I'm talking about. Platforms are the new public space, and therefore, how do I have access? How do I bargain? There's no way I can bargain with the Amazons of the world or the Flipkarts of the India. If I want to sell my produce on your platform, do I have the bargaining power? And therefore, I feel that we need to have policies which put a ceiling on the prices of the smart devices. Why should a smartphone cost you 7, 8, 10, going up to lakhs of rupees? Why? And I think, why should a tablet cost you a few thousand rupees? The policy is needed there, that you put a ceiling. If you want every Indian rural household and every household in the slum to go digital, definitely the GDP of the country will increase, but such bold policies need to be taken. I'll just stop here.
May I just have one sentence, Napinai, directly to what you were saying, Rima? The prices of the phones are directed by IP protection, so let's not go that way. But on the education and the kids that have no access to the online, let me just give you one fact from again COVID situation. Governments have given stimuli to their, big and small firms, etc., etc., etc. Very tiny percentage, less than 8%, actually has related to the woman's need in how they need to be helped. For example, there is no country that have given any money to women to pay for some childcare or to get help in education, or to get the credit to buy the online devices for the children education, right? So when you look at how the policy reacts, again, it reacts with the man lens and caters to the needs that are not actually woman needs, because they don't understand what they are, right? They don't live it, okay? Thank you for giving me the floor.
No, of course. Vishaka, before I move it on to you, so there are just two things I wanted to put forth, and then put that question also to you and Anya first, and then to the others. Prashant has made a very interesting observation, which actually ties into what Rima and Mia just pointed out. He talks about how we have institutionalized discrimination. He says that there are states and industries which have the offers or schemes or loans for laptops to the male child, whereas it is for weddings when it comes to the female child. I thought that was a very interesting thought that has also come from Prashant. But I feel that literally the question of the day goes to Sati Shah, who has raised a very innovative construct. And I want both of you to address again. Would love to hear from Mia and Rima on this aspect too. Now, what Sati says is we have this kind of, labor competition and privacy competition, etc. Why not evaluate the concept of gender competition? My understanding of her question is like this. For instance, yesterday when I had given a quote on this NPCI's capping of the numbers to which UPI connects can be given by a Google Pay or a WhatsApp Pay, etc. The whole issue was about leveling the playing field, to ensure that early players are not going to take advantage of a dominant position and to make sure that there is a level playing field. We are today talking about women in technology and all the issues that are there. And the way I read her suggestion is like this, of level the playing field by creating a kind of gender competition mode, which will enable people who have been suppressed for so long, who have had lesser opportunities, to get better opportunities. Your thoughts on this very interesting construct raised also, and also in the earlier issues raised. Vishaka, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Actually, this is a perfect question because it sort of combines what I wanted to say earlier and a nice way of looking at it. So, I think just building, okay, so let's start with the gender competition. If we were to have some sort of way, let's say some new numbers, right, which would, I think what we would, and if we said that basically, if you score more than 50, you lose the competition. And if you score below 50, you win the competition. So we flip the marking and we basically put in a whole bunch of questions around gender differentials. And we circulate it to say, school kids. Now, I'm taking your concept seriously. What you'll find is basically that all the boys in the school, most of them, will be above 50. So they will lose the gender competition. And all the girls, etc., it will never be 100%, right? Will win the gender competition. What I would say again, if we flip reality, is that if you win the gender competition, what it means is that you have shown that in your life, you don't currently have access. You have the potential, but you don't have the access to all the resources to move ahead. Therefore, you should be given an award for winning the competition, which is like positive discrimination or affirmative.
You're now sounding like China's social credit system. I'm a little worried about this.
I think you should trust me. No, but what I'm saying is I'm just playing with it, right? Basically, what I'm saying is that flip it and say that if you win the gender competition, you establish gender discrimination. And you should then be able to avail of certain things like a data fellowship, a smartphone scholarship, right? And it should be positive discrimination, right? It should try and redress the past. It should be what's called affirmative action. So and again, it can never be purely on gender. What about caste, right? But what I'm trying to say is that, this is what I mean by the lag between life and policy. We know midday meal schemes have worked in schools to enroll girls. We know that scholarships for books, for uniforms, etc., right, are bringing poorer kids to school. I mean, the truth is, your book and your book today is your mobile phone. You need that scholarship, right? So I feel like we need a little bit of imagination. And I want to actually give an example from something I found long back, which relates to governance, which is in panchayats in Maharashtra. We did a study where we found that when there were men who were dominant forces in the village panchayat, they would inevitably use the panchayat funds to build roads, etc., for the whole village. But when there were women who were dominant and could make decisions, they would use those limited panchayat funds to actually add one more classroom to the village school, right? Because they knew then that they could get their daughter to be educated one more standard, because she would otherwise not be sent, unlike her brother, to another school like 10 villages away, etc. So again, who you have governing, deciding, making policies is a huge differentiator. Yeah.
Anya? You're still muted.
I'm not sure I have a direct comment on this question, Apinay, but what I am thinking about while we are talking is that I do still feel that we are underestimating in our conversation a little bit the question of the social pressures and restraints, or perhaps not underestimating it, but we're downplaying it in many of the examples that we give. And I do think that's a really, really big challenge. Actually, as Mia and Rima were talking about the apps, I got reminded of a story that was on Twitter a few days ago about a girl who had used a loan app called Udar Loan, a girl from Tamil Nadu, and she was asked by a representative of the loan app to video call naked if she failed to pay the loan on time. And the tweet was sent out a few days ago and said that that girl attempted suicide. Now, I don't have more details on whether this is truthful, etc. But even if we're not sure, we can imagine it is, right? Because we do know of similar stories having happened. And so I really think, again, in that context of, so we want to encourage access to loans, finances for women so that they can innovate, etc. But this is a reality that you then have to deal with. And when it says that this girl has attempted suicide, it really makes me think, so what is going on in her head, right? What are the pressures that have been put on her, perhaps by her family, perhaps by her community, how she herself looks at her body? Because strictly speaking, you would want to have a situation then where a girl like this could constantly come forward and say, this has been asked from me, and this man is wrong, not I am wrong, right? And I think it is really a big challenge, that the kind of societal beliefs that lead a girl to actually feel that in a situation like this, this is the only solution. It's hard because as a feminist, I can say I don't agree with this way of looking at society, but it is a reality that frames the access that these girls have. And because it is so different from the normative understandings of the world that many of us have, it's also really hard to target it directly, right? Because you can't, like, we can have a fight about ideology and what women should be like, but the outcomes of those changes are not going to happen in the next 5 years. While if this gender gap, which, let's face it, in India is big, one of the biggest in the world, right? And I think that also we really have to be upfront about. The ITU figures show a 10-point gender gap. In India, the internet use gender gap is still estimated by GSMA to be about 50%. That's a 2019 figure, right? So this 10% worldwide, we sadly have a lot to contribute to that in a context where Digital India as a narrative and initiative is so much part of the identity of the country, right? As a nation, how we see ourselves. So I think for all of these things, the question then is, how do you deal with the social? So I do think if Digital India is part of the identity, there is a role for the government, at least to start signaling different things around this, right? To start signaling that this is not a girl's responsibility, that women should be able to do these things freely, to take that kind of messaging seriously and to highlight this. Because leadership and the examples that leaders provide are really important with this as well. And for the social constraints, since we're not gonna have these straight-on solutions, I think even in education, right, an important part in the way in which the gender gap in education started to be addressed was through the provision of midday meals. Like, who would have thought food would be the solution to an educational gap? But it became a very concrete incentive for families that were struggling to actually say, this is enough for us to say, well, we're going to do this, we'll go to school. And to start changing a pattern. And so for some of these questions, I think we really need to think in more detail also. What are the incentives that we can come up with in different places so that the power of the social constraints there is lessened because there is something else that has leverage in the other direction?
Absolutely. Two very important issues you've brought up, Anya. In fact, that formed the basis for me to launch Cyber Sati, and Sati translates as friend, as you all know. So the whole idea was that most of the time we found that victims were blaming themselves. And of course, the others were also blaming the victim. So there is a kind of stigma attached to you falling prey to a crime instead of criminal being stigmatized, you know. And the other aspect was that we found that most of the victims felt that they were alone. They were alone in being the only person who was silly enough to fall victim to a crime like this. They were alone because they did not have remedies. They were alone because they didn't know how to approach even whatever remedies they believed they had. So the whole construct of Cyber Sati was to go out there and to ensure that at least people get to know that they're not alone, that there are remedies and there are easy ways of accessing these remedies, and why they should in fact access it, not just to protect themselves, but also to protect others. Because when one victim stays silent, it will just aggravate the attack on them and also possibly result in other people being victimized further. Many instances of physical as well as virtual crimes have indicated this. So I am kind of like taking the next question, which will probably be the last in the, keeping an eye on the clock, which is about what is it that law enforcement can do to make it a safer space for women. Digital media or social media, or for that matter, any digital space. So one of the things that I have been speaking about continuously is, you know, having laws, having policies which are precise and which specifically point out what is the offense and what is it that therefore you should not commit are very important. You know, having simple and precise laws. Two, and more important, just adding more and more laws are not going to keep us safer. We've already seen that post Nirbhaya case and the Justice Verma committee report, so many new provisions were included in IPC, the Indian Penal Code. Has it made women any safer? Have we not seen equally and more aggravated forms of assault on women thereafter? So it's not enough to just bring in new laws. We need effective enforcement. We need strong messages to be sent out that any violation of a law or policy will result in consequences. If that is not there, then just adding more and more laws are not really going to help us. So this is just my thoughts on this. And one aspect which I wanted to pick on, the innovative or lateral remedies, which we don't seem to be really following through enough. So in a recent fellowship, I got the privilege of meeting people from different jurisdictions. And there was this journalist from China. And when I was listening to the kind of activism that was happening in places like Armenia and China, etc., one of the thoughts that were foremost, and it is unfortunate, it's an unfortunate reflection, I would say, on how women perceive their safety in India, probably. Because the top of my mind thought, even with respect to activism online, was how safe are you physically when you take these kind of positions? So this lady from China told me that women form a substantial part of the workforce in China. So China is one of the safest places for women. because any assault, a physical assault on a woman, any threat to a woman is looked at as dilution of their participation in the workforce. And therefore, we are a lot safer there. And I thought, what a wonderful way of looking at women's safety, right? You highlight how important they are in a particular field, and therefore you ensure their safety. So I thought, I was reminded of this conversation I had with her when you were talking about lateral thoughts in terms of ensuring safety. So with the time in hand, I would request all of you all to give your last comments on the discussions. It's open to you in terms of whatever you want to focus on. And it's really wonderful that the audience has also been so participative. So over to you for your last comments, please. Anya, let's start with you.
Well, I'm still thinking a little bit about what you said about the law, Napinai. I think the hard thing when it comes to many of these issues is that the law that's often asked for is actually censorship law. It's very often, in the context of India, also framed in terms of morality and obscenity. Neither of these things tend to work in favor of women's rights. And so when we say that we want to ask for more law or more precise law, I am really not convinced of that need in many cases. So there are people who will say, we don't have provisions for fighting revenge porn, for example, because we don't have a provision in law that says exactly that. But I completely disagree. We have provisions in both the IPC and the IT Act that allow us to deal with those specific instances. And I'm really glad we don't have a law that speaks of revenge porn, because that term in itself is actually really problematic, right? Revenge, as my colleague Vrinda Bandari has pointed out, makes it sound as if somehow the woman did something that like justifies or makes a response expected. And porn makes it sound as if all sexual expression is necessarily problematic, right? So I think in terms of asking for more law, we need to be really, really careful what we're asking for. I do think in terms of the control we have over our data, for example, coming back also to Rema's point about how consent is so meaningless right now, and how then do we make it meaningful? I think there we can ask for more law. But there is much less political will to do that, right? And to have actually strong regulation for this. And so in the context of, say, violence against women online, you hear much less about it. And I also think we need to be realistic. Not the law obviously has a place, right? But I also think we need to be realistic about what law can do, again, because of these social constraints. I have spoken to an organization that works in an area where gang rapes are sadly common, and they confirmed that almost all of those are filmed. I asked them, but doesn't that help to arrest the perpetrators then more easily, because you have evidence now? No, what it actually does is it makes the families of those girls move out of the village, because now there is a record of this act forever. So how can you ever get over that shame, right? So as long as that's the reaction within society, even if there is goodwill on behalf of the police, we should not overemphasize what is possible without seeing the bigger picture.
Absolutely. So you're right in this aspect about looking at headings. You know, even lawyers make this mistake, because the headings do not decide what is the crime. It is the content within the section that decides what is a crime. So you cannot assume that there are not remedies merely because you don't have something that says cyberbullying or revenge porn. And I'm totally with you. In all my sessions, I keep repeating that we should stop using the phrase itself as revenge porn. We could use cyber extortion or sextortion, but that's what it is in a way. Mia, keeping in mind your request, over to you and then to the other two speakers.
Well, thank you, and apologies that I have
one decision of the Supreme Court after Mia completes.
Right. Okay. So, sorry that I have to steal a moment just to say thank you so much. I would want to add what Anya was saying. I fully agree with her actually, that the proof in the pudding here is really enforcement. And that enforcement really depends on the changes in the social contract and the social mindset, right? And until we sort that out. And that starts at home, right? That starts with really education from home, and then school, etc. And then you can and in funding, right? And in changing how you distribute income with respect to understanding that women actually are economic asset. And so this is what China comes from, right? They realize the importance of women as an economic asset in the long term and in the short term. And that's why you have these sorts of reactions. So with this, I have to leave. I'm very sorry that I cannot be here until the vote of thanks, but so thank you so much for the opportunity. And I hope this is not the last time we are actually engaged in conversation. I will reach out to you because the inputs and the submission that you are providing are really fantastic. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here, Mira.
Okay. Stay well. Thank you so much.
Now over to the other two panelists. And before that, Anya, just to give an idea of what the Supreme Court says, in Anuj Garg's, it catches bang on the issue that you have pointed out and specifically says that's not the answer. So this was about the dance bars closing down and the bar girls being deprived of their rights, etc. And it talks about privacy rights, prescribing autonomy to choose per profession, whereas security concerns texture methodology of delivery of this assurance. And then the Supreme Court goes on to hold that a reasonable proposition that the measures to safeguard such a guarantee of autonomy should not be so strong that the essence of the guarantee itself is lost. State protection must not translate into censorship. This is as precise as one can get, but people have to follow it in terms of applying it practically also. So Rima and Vishaka, sorry, I think you want to come back with the comment.
I think that's a great example of a positive case, but part of the challenge is also that the Supreme Court itself is not always consistent in how it deals with these questions, right? So, but yes, this was a positive order.
Vishaka, and then the last words to Rima.
Well, I think I agree completely that we don't need more laws, right? We also know that whether it's online or offline, law is not necessarily what women turn to automatically for their sense of justice, right? It's used in very specific cases, and there are too many barriers to using the law, particularly depending on who you are. So sometimes the process itself can be the punishment, unfortunately, right? Like just going through the legal process. So what I would say is that one is we need to not think of everything justice residing only in the law first. Second, within the law, so there is, I mean, for better or for worse, yes, platforms do need to deal with this issue. I think the other thing is, it would be interesting to tie these things like, now there's so much sexual harassment and employers are sort of so loath to have people who are accused of sexual harassment, right, as part of Me Too. But we don't see that same sense of sort of, disgust, etc., and boycotting the person if it's online sexual harassment. So, how can we sort of involve bigger this? And I would say with the law, what I would always say nowadays is that it's too much criminal law anyway. What happened to civil laws in this country, right? The Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act is a wonderfully successful example of the use of civil laws. What happened to the concept of, say, even damages or economic penalties? So there's actually a suite of things that can, be done to ensure that women, girls, trans persons, etc., are safe online. But I will end by saying it's the iceberg. Everything is on the top. What's below is your gender, your patriarchy, your head, your mindset, all of which is offline, submerged, invisible. We have to tackle that too. Yeah.
Rima? You're muted, Rima.
Yeah, the host wasn't allowing me to unmute. Thank you, the host. I think what I would suggest is also that we need to rethink what encompasses digital literacy. Because what we focus more when it comes to digital literacy is on the technicalities of the technology. But I think we need to bring in today what we discussed are the different components which also need to, and it needs to become more holistic. So that's one point. And also in the education curriculum, in the school education, and we need to also integrate digital literacy as well, because then only I think as we grow up and as we start using the different forms of technology, I can then decide, what's good for me and what's bad for me and for the society and for the community at large. So that's what I wanted to say. And thank you so much. It's been such a privilege to be on this panel with Vishakha ji and Napinai ji, you and Anya and Mia as well. So thank you so much.
Rima ji, I would say it's our privilege that you were also part of this panel with us. So thank you so much for being here and also for your absolutely valuable contributions. So to all of you panelists, Vishakha, Anya, Mia, who could not stay on, and Rima, thank you all for those wonderful inputs. We have, in a way, I mean, like, whenever you start a session, 1 hour seems like a long time. And by the time when you finish the session, it feels like it has just whizzed past. And it's an indication of how engaging the conversations have been, and today's definitely has been. We have covered the gamut of thoughts in terms of women, in terms of their engagement as a workforce, in terms of policies that can drive their involvement and empower them in terms of capturing their equal rights and equal spaces, about the kind of lessons that we learn from grassroots workers, and how they innovate and use technology for their benefit, and how this can be then universalized across the platforms. And we have discussed about a lot of issues on safety and security. Nothing can really just close out in terms of these kind of conversations. Effectively, what we have got today are just thoughts, which it's been so thought-provoking. These are all issues we need to take forward in terms of how we can engage and implement on a larger platform. And on this, I would also like to close out with my thanks, especially to Cuts, for having me here and also making Cybersati a collaborative partner for this initiative. All that we have discussed here and all that we look forward to as an outcome is very, very close to my heart and also to the vision and mission of Cybersati. So thank you for having me here. And here's to hoping that there will be a lot more equality, and it would come to a stage where probably men have to ask us for equality in terms of opportunities and security, possibly, right? So over to you, Alka, and thank you all for having us here.
Thank you so much.
And I just can't agree more with you, Napinai, that we really need to take this equality in a big way. And also my thanks to the wonderful panelists for such thought-provoking and engaging discussions. Mia, Rima, Anya, Vishakha, and Shubhangi for the presentation, of course. I actually had been thinking of that, we indeed are living a digital life, and the free and fair access is now non-negotiable. We just can't do without it, with half of the population staying away from, even access as something as basic as that. And this also reminds me of one little intervention that we Cuts has done very recently, which was with women with disabilities and the digital literacy, how that had transformed their lives in terms of the access into bank accounts, to other things, and open many opportunities to them. So I really feel it's not just women, but we'll have to deep dive and look into women, girls, those with special needs, and other other things around. Also, very importantly, one thing which came up in today's discussion very sharply was about how do we ensure safety of women and girls in public safety, given public spaces, sorry, and given that online spaces are emerging as big, public spaces, how do we really ensure safety there? And one of the UN Women's Program, which actually focuses and looks upon many aspects of public spaces, has one little component of online public spaces as well. And I think this pandemic and the couple of months that we have seen, how things have changed, especially at one point where our policy brief mentions that in February, National Commission for Women received something like 26 complaints, online complaints, which increased to more than double in just 1 month, which was the lockdown period that has initiated in India. So we really need to see that how this big component actually becomes a more, prominent kind of a space for us to put in more evidences that we have generated on grounds. We as in the civil society, the researchers, academicians, and really we should put this together to the policy makers and people who influence policies in a better way. Without this, we just can't think of sustained livelihoods. We just can't think of holistic education and access of girls to its skilling. Many of the things would just be left behind, and the very underlying principle of no one left behind won't just be attained. So this is high time that we really put our work experiences, thoughts together, and several has really come out very, very well in today's webinar, which we would be putting it together for onward sharing. And I'm sure that this doesn't end here. The follow-up action and our effort to influence the cybersecurity policy for India would just start from here. So thanks a lot to all the panelists, to CyberSathi, to all my colleagues at CUTS, and also all the participants for such wonderful questions and keeping it really lively and engaging. Thanks so much. We look forward to it.